Welcome to America in Focus. I'm Dan McCaleb, executive editor of the Center Square Newswire service. Joining me today is Casey Harper, the Center Square's Washington, D.C. bureau chief. Some interesting developments about the origins of COVID-19 over the past week. Casey, first, the Department of Energy last weekend, essentially a report from the Wall Street Journal, said that the Department of Energy now thinks that the most likely scenario is that COVID-19 was leaked from the Wuhan lab, that it did not come from nature, that it wasn't passed on from humans by, for example, a bat, that the Wuhan lab that American taxpayers have funded by millions of dollars where they experimented on novel coronaviruses, that's how COVID-19 started and spread. Tell us more about this.
Are you telling me that the novel coronavirus that began in Wuhan, China, may be linked to the Wuhan Institute of Virology that studies coronaviruses in Wuhan, China?
It sounds like a stretch, but not just maybe, most likely did, is what the FBI director, he said that back in 2021, but he has since confirmed that that's the FBI's view as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's two stories here. One is, where did COVID come from? And the other is, wow, the narrative has really changed on this. And what was once something that could get you mocked and banned or online is now something being stated by official government agencies. And man, doesn't that feel familiar when it comes to COVID and what we're allowed to say and not say, right? So the first story is a more simple, straightforward one is where did this virus come from? Now, to be fair, nobody knows for sure. No one is saying 100% sure it definitely came from this lab. So that's something, I mean, we still don't have that level of certainty. But as you said, both the FBI and the Department of Energy are saying what was once considered a kind of conspiracy theory, which is this virus came from a lab in Wuhan. Now, there are others who have more official sources who still cast doubt on that, who say, well, I don't know. But we've seen this real transformation as time has gone on. More research has been done into it. More facts have come to light. What was once written off, and I wrote about this at thecentersquare.com, how the major media outlets really mocked people who even considered it, even very early on in the pandemic. This is just kind of amazing to me how we've just seen the media miss it so many times on big stories.
COVID-19 being a big one. Why don't we go through a few of the examples, Casey, that you reported on of big mainstream media outlets just essentially mocking or putting down people who suggested that that's the most likely scenario, that COVID-19 was created and spread from the Wuhan lab. One of your stories this week, you pointed out some of these media outlets who called it a myth and some other things. Tell us about those.
Right. Yeah, I mean, 2020, the Associated Press called the idea a myth. New York Times called it a conspiracy theory. Washington Post called it a fringe theory. They called it a conspiracy theory. So, and this is early on in 2020. I mean, for example, this Washington Post article is in February of 2020. I mean, this is so early on. So just to say that we knew for sure or could know that something was or wasn't a conspiracy theory, it was just so early on for news outlets to be making judgments. And for example, Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, he was really pushing this idea of raising questions like, hey, there's a Wuhan Institute of Virology right where this lab, just a few miles from where this virus originated. We should look into this. This could really be the source. And he was just viciously attacked by the media. And the Washington Post, for example, had to issue a correction.
On that specific article, right?
Right. Yeah. And here's a correction. Earlier versions of the story and its headline inaccurately characterized comments by Senator Tom Cotton regarding the origins of the coronavirus. The term debunked and the Post's use of conspiracy theory have been removed. Then as now, there was no determination about the origins of the virus. And so when this, Wall Street Journal initially reported the Energy Department's findings about the origin of COVID, he tweeted out the WSJ story and he said, well. So, he's being vindicated a little bit. As I said, it's important to know where COVID came from because, one, as you said, the lab was funded by taxpayers. There's a big debate right now over whether we were funding the specific kind of research that creates coronaviruses or if we were just funding the lab in other ways and it happened to also be creating coronaviruses. Depends on who you ask. Dr. Fauci or Rand Paul, you'll get a different answer. But there's that question. And then there's, China's role in it, how China covered it up or didn't respond rightly. The world basically was delayed in preparing for COVID because of China's response. You could make that argument. And then there's kind of the more political argument. There's the free speech argument, which we've seen again and again. where social media companies and big corporate media censor a story. And then it turns out they were kind of wrong. It's happened with vaccines, not totally wrong, but they overplayed the effectiveness of vaccines. They were wrong about this origins story. They were wrong about Hunter Biden and shut it down and censored that story right before the election. And now it turns out that's true. So I think the confidence in big tech and corporate media is really eroding, and it's their own doing right now.
All right. President Biden was criticized. Remember the Ministry of Truth that he wanted to create to tamp down, quote unquote, misinformation that now some of it's we found could be true.
Yeah, Ministry of Truth. Maybe just like a ministry of just fact checking or something. I mean, a ministry of common sense is maybe more in order.
Fact checkers.
Yeah. Or a ministry of just open debate. I mean, that's the thing is the good news is that it doesn't take very long because of the internet for more information and ideas to rise to the surface, and people have debated on Twitter and to find out more information. And so within, only a few months, really, we started a year or so, we started to find out about Wuhan and what was going on. Because of the internet, it happened really quickly. But when we shut down that debate, the truth may never actually rise to the surface.
You attended one of the White House press briefings this week, know how those things go. Generally, the folks that are there every day from some major media outlets, they get called on to ask questions. You were going to attempt to ask what Biden was going to do with this new information about the Wuhan lab. You did not get your question in. The White House press secretary did not call on you to ask a question. But what do you think? What is the next steps? What should the Biden administration do? Republicans, I understand you're working on a story for the weekend. Republicans are calling for a declassification of all the documents related to the origins of COVID.
Right. Republicans want him to declassify it. They want transparency. I think Biden's going to be reluctant to do that. The White House this week is really pointing out that there's not a consensus. Yes, the FBI is saying something, but there's not a consensus on this. Other reporters pushed and said, hey, what's going to happen to China if this is really their fault? And Secretary Anthony Blinken he said, well, we're not going to make a decision on that till we really get a consensus. So that's where they're kind of in a wait and see mode right now.
Our listeners can keep up with your reporting on this story and more at thecentersquare.com. For Casey Harper, I'm Dan McCaleb. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.